All right, all right. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Marcel Dixon. He is running for Congress and he is challenging Representative Jim Clyburn. Thanks so much for coming on, Marcel.
Thank you so much for having me, Sabrina.
So, Marcel, I think I first want to start off with this clip from Jim Clyburn. This was recent. So shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. In this interview, Jim Clyburn is being asked, like, what has Joe Biden done for Black voters? So I just want to start off with this segment here.
My concern is much more with Black voters getting the right information, getting all of the information so that they will be informed voters. That's my concern. I believe very strongly that this president has done what is necessary to earn the support of African Americans all over this country. But I'm also concerned that when we report these results, they don't always tell the full story.
Okay, so that was Representative Jim Clyburn, and again, trying to make the case for Joe Biden for Black voters, because obviously we all know that you can't win in the Democratic Party without the Black vote. I want to hear personally from you, because you are running against him. What do you think about that statement that Jim Clyburn made there, that basically Black voters are not informed?
That is one of the most insulting statements that the Democrats make. Okay, both parties, of course, play that, well, we're doing great. People just are too dumb to realize it. That's pretty much what they say. If the average American, and this is even more so with Black Americans, if they say that their lives have not gotten any better, then that's exactly what is the reality. To tell people that you're too stupid to realize how good you have it and how good of a job we're doing is absolutely insulting. And I will say to you what I have been hearing. The cost of living for people continues to skyrocket, and that has not declined at all during this administration. What I am hearing more and more, even though Black Americans, and particularly freedmen, who are the Black American descendants of the people who are emancipated by this country, what I am hearing them say is they're seeing this nation spend trillions of dollars on the budget for the Pentagon, on Ukraine, on Israel, on caring for people in the country illegally. And they're saying, well, hey, what about me? And that's what Black American voters have been asking a lot, is what about me? This administration has spent a historic amount of money on Native Americans, okay? This administration during the COVID-19 era, it was not exclusively an Asian American Pacific Islander bill, but they were definitely the reason for why that bill was written during the COVID-19 era. And the fact that that was unanimous, the fact that this country saw Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders under attack increasingly, and within a short period of time, this administration took action that Black Americans, freemen, for centuries have been under vicious assault, government sanctioned, and we have yet to get a specific hate bill to target us because we have a specifically unique history. It's insulting to say to us that we just don't know any better and things are great for us.
What are some of the needs for people, particularly in his district in South Carolina? I've explained to people before that his district is one of the poorest districts in the country. He's not poor, though. So I don't understand, why do people continue to support Jim Clyburn when it's obvious that their material conditions have not improved?
Well, I'm going to address the first one. There's a plethora of issues. James Clyburn's district is the sixth poorest district in the United States of America out of 435 congressional districts total. And that does not get cited enough. It's funny how he criticized Nina Turner in Ohio when she was running against, what's her name?
Chantel.
Chantel Brown. And I was hoping Nina Turner would really hit him with that. His district is the sixth poorest in the United States of America. His district has the highest eviction rate in the United States of America. Black women are the most likely to be evicted. His district has one of the highest rates of land theft. I used to call it land loss. I'm trying to train myself to say land theft, because that's what it is, of Black Americans. His district has humongous issues with water quality. Everyone knows about Flint. And a lot of people know about Jackson, Mississippi, but everyone needs to know about Denmark, South Carolina, a 70% black town in the Clyburn's district that has not had clean water in decades. Okay, you can look at North Charleston. You can look at Florence, South Carolina. His district is also located in what is called, or makes up the majority of his district is in the corridor of shame. It refers to a network of rural, majority black towns where poverty is unforgivingly high and educational failure is also unforgivingly high. His district is one of the districts that has the highest rate of people earning the minimum wage in the United States of America. So the poverty rate alone, combined with land laws, and there's a system called heirs property. I don't want to get into the details, but heirs property is pretty much the system where the property is owned by a family. Everyone has to share it, so you don't get any equity from the property. And number one source of wealth for Black Americans is home ownership, land ownership. And yet the main source of wealth in his district, we are prevented from benefiting from it because of heirs property. And he's taking no action on that at all.
That's right. But people continue to support him.
So that is sort of a myth. The turnout rate in his district, I'm not sure if you've looked at it, is incredibly low. Sometimes 12 to 20%, and 20% is a rare high. So we get less than oftentimes a 15% voter turnout. That's one. Two, a lot of people say, well, why do Black people keep voting for him? No, it's the Black people who turn out the vote, which is an incredibly small minority who vote for him. Yes, by and large, but it's also a lot of white liberals who vote for Clyburn. And when you look at Clyburn, he usually wins re-election by 120 to 150,000 votes. His district, like most congressional districts, has around 700,000 people. And of that 700,000, around 600,000 are either registered voters or eligible voters. So he is not getting a lot of support. What he gets is enough support to be reelected, but by the vast majority in my district are not voting for him. It is an issue that the ones who do vote for him continue to do so, but those might be the ones who have actually benefited from him, because there are some people who have benefited from Clyburn, some of the nonprofits, okay, some of the churches, some of his buddies. So there are definitely people who have benefited from him. It's just not the average person in his district.
Well, you are running against him again, and this is your vision for a better America. You mentioned a better deal for Black America, better transportation, better education, a better plan for thriving communities. I want to start with the first one, a better deal for Black America, where obviously, for those who are not aware, you are for reparations, but also, which is really important to mention, you are for cash reparations as well. A lot of people say they're for reparations, but as soon as you ask them, like RFK Jr., he was asked in an interview, do you support cash reparations? He was like, no. So that's important for people to understand. Can you explain to everyone, why is that significant when you think about the plight of Black Americans in this country?
So here's the thing. I am not doing anything new. I'm actually following the precedent the United States of America has set. The United States of America has done reparations many times before and is currently doing them, whether it's settlements for Native Americans, whether it's for the downwinders who are still collecting reparations now, as they should, the people who were exposed to radiation by nuclear testing, intern Japanese, and in the case when they were deceased, their descendants. All of those people and many other groups from Iranian hostages have received direct cash payments, not because individuals done them wrong, but the American government did them wrong. Ronald Reagan, this is a conservative thing. It's funny how the Republican Party rails against reparations, and yet they've been more often than the Democrats, the reparations party. Ronald Reagan said if the government has caused a problem, they have the responsibility to fix it. So direct cash payments is a precedent that this nation has done. It should not be any exception for Black Americans, freedmen, who after the Civil War, Reconstruction was supposed to close all gaps that were caused by government-sanctioned, government-initiated oppression, and instead they terrorized us for another 100 years. A lot of times people say, well, Will Smith is rich, Oprah's rich, they don't need reparations. It's not about whether a person is rich. All Black Americans can be trillionaires, and we will still be entitled to reparations. It is about a debt owed. My plans calls for direct cash payments. It calls for the Black Wall Street Initiative. When you look at all the prosperous Black towns and city blocks that were destroyed by even sanctioned by the government or by mobs that were underwritten by the government, literally given military weapon. It calls for black land grants, and it calls for the re-establishment of the Freedmen's Bureau. Native Americans have their tribal governments. Black Americans need to have an office that's not going to be under the federal government, but will be allocated a budget that's going to be responsive to our needs, and that's going to be staffed by us because we can take care of us.
Well said. It's really important that you mention what happened under Ronald Reagan, because I've told people about this before and people are like, no, you're mistaken. No, I'm not. You could just Google this information. I mean, a lot of us, I think, weren't born during that time, or we weren't old enough to know what was happening during that time. But yes, these things have already happened. It just seems like when you mention it in reference to American descendants of slavery, they don't want to do it for us, but they're doing things for other groups. And the other thing that you mentioned is better transportation. So this is a big one because I've lived in South Carolina. It's not one of those states you can live in and not have a car. I'm just going to keep it real. Like, we have to improve public transportation all across this country. But you mentioned here that the 6th congressional district of South Carolina is 97% rural. And again, that adds to the point, like it's like you have to have a vehicle. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and may I just quickly say, Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, which was reparations for interned Japanese or their descendants, if in case they were there. So people say, well, you weren't the one that went through the wrong. Okay, neither were the children of the interned Japanese, but they still got the money. In 1988, I was 4 years old. The checks went out in 1992. Just want to be clear. Yes, so we're mainly a rural district. People don't often understand the impact that not having transportation can cause, because a lot of Americans are urban, and you may have at least a bus that's readily accessible or a bus stop. In my area, that's not the case. When a person doesn't have adequate transportation outside of public schools that will provide transportation for you, you will struggle to get to a place of employment, or to get to a place of employment that has better pay. You will struggle to get to medical appointments. You will struggle to be able to go shopping. You will struggle to be able to go to recreational opportunities. Your life will literally be almost living in an open air prison, not because you are being forced in a certain area, but because you cannot escape or be able to leave that area and come and go as you please. So the same way we have home buyers assistance programs, I believe we need to have automobile buyers assistance programs. And that's for which my plan calls. Of course, the details I will sit out and work with my colleagues, but I envision a program that works very similar to home buyers programs, where we see if a person qualifies for assistance, and then the same way people receive EBT cards, my plan will partner with mechanics in the area, in their garages, for people who need assistance with maintenance. Because one thing to afford a car is another thing to be able to afford insurance, be able to afford maintenance. And we will partner with those people so that you can get maintenance that will be provided for you to help you get, people don't like to say handout. It's definitely not a handout. It will definitely be a hand up. We invest in other countries all the time. We need to invest in the citizens of this country. And in a rural area, not having a vehicle, I want to be very quick. I'm living in a coastal area. I've taught for almost 20 years. I've taken kids on field trips who've never seen the ocean before, yet they're just a matter of minutes from the ocean. That is what not having transportation does. It literally traps you, and it greatly devalues your quality of life. It keeps you from necessities, but also from things you would like to do.
That's right. It also limits your job prospects too, because then it's like you're limited to where you can find a job.
And healthcare prospects. People can't get to the hospital, or they die on their way there when they can finally find a ride.
That's right. Another one that you have here is better education. It says South Carolina is home of the corridor of shame, a disappointingly long list of schools along I-95 that are in deeply impoverished counties that have long experienced neglect and academic failure. Let's talk a little bit about that.
I attended one of such schools as a child, and I've taught at such schools during my entire career, as I am teaching at one as we speak. The issues with public schools, it's not just the way they're funded. I hate when people make it seem like you fund them all adequately, all problems will disappear. No. Public schools You show me a community, I'll show you often the quality of the public school. A troubled community is also going to have troubled schools. However, funding is an issue. Funding allows schools to purchase certain programs that could possibly help not just the children, but the families they serve. The issue with public schooling, if you live in a zip code that's pretty impoverished, such as where I currently live and where I grew up, and yet you go, I'm in a town called Ridgeland, but you go 15 minutes away to a town called Bluffton, which is the richest town in South Carolina, the funding is going to be higher because public schools are funded by the local tax base. So if you're in a zip code where people are relatively wealthy, your funding's up here. If you're in a zip code where people are mainly impoverished, your local tax base is far lower. You're almost being punished because of where you live. And yet we punish people for trying to attend schools in better funded areas. I call for a commission that will, South Carolina has in its state's constitution, a minimally adequate education, which is not unbelievable to believe they put that in there, but it's still unbelievable. However, my plan will call for funding that will allow students to have a high quality education and whatever the local counties cannot meet. Again, I am a believer. No, I don't believe in big government, as people call it, but I'm a believer that the government has a responsibility to invest in its citizenry. So I believe that whatever the local counties put up, the federal government should invest in helping to close the gap so they can all meet a standard rate. If a county makes more than that rate, that's fine. But there should be a standard rate where every child should be able to access a high quality education, where we should be able to feed kids breakfast, lunch, a snack, and in the case where students are more needed, even send home dinner. There should be, I believe that we should merge the Department of Social Services with the Department of Education, not to punish parents, as is often the case, but to support struggling families, because people often want successful schools, successful families. They see that tip of the iceberg, but underneath, they don't see the issues that those families face. And one of them is just a simple lack of support.
That's right. And the federal government can cover the gap, too. They can pay for all of it, actually, because I went to Dodge schools when I was growing up, and the federal government pays for all the Dodge schools. We didn't have to pay for anything. We didn't have to pay for uniforms if you wanted to play a sport. We didn't have to pay for our instruments when I was a part of band. And that just goes to show you guys, if the federal government can fund those Dodge schools, they can fund some of these public schools as well. It's not fair. Like, your family shouldn't have to be a part of the military in order for you to receive that benefit. That's just kind of how I look at it. And then last but not least, you have a better plan for thriving communities. It says here, South Carolina District 6 is the 6th poorest district out of 435 congressional total districts in the U.S. James Clyburn has had 30 years to get it right and has failed. Let's talk a little bit about your plan here for thriving communities.
So I know people say minimum wage. I believe in a livable wage. And the reason being, because a minimum wage, that is something that is fairly mandated. $15 an hour, that was not enough ever since, the year 2000, I would say. So I believe in a livable wage, which will depend on the state in which you live. Because in what will be considered livable in South Carolina, and livable is usually what qualifies. I hate the way they measure poverty in America. They measure it incorrectly, but it's usually measured as 3 times the cost of what it will take to feed whatever family size you may currently have. So what the formula for a livable wage in South Carolina is like $17 an hour. That is absolutely nothing. That's not even enough in South Carolina. It's barely enough. In California, that is absolutely nothing. So we need to have a livable wage that will be on a per state basis, because, we are a very diverse people living in a very large country. The next thing I call for one of the main issues I hear people mention is violence. Now, yes, on paper, violence is still at historically low overall. We've had some spikes here and there, but violence is still drastically down, but people do not feel safe. Believe it or not, one of the things that have been shown to lead to safe communities is having parks. It may sound very insignificant, but research has shown the more blighted an area, the more crime an area is going to have. So if you have houses that are vacant, if you have poor lighting in a community, that has been shown to lead towards crime. You have less green spaces in a community, that has been shown to increase crime. Now, the reason behind that is that when you have a community where people are actually having a communal spirit, it likely leads to a decrease in crime. Policing, policing, especially my district was a majority Black, is often a concern. And that doesn't mean that all police officers are bad. It doesn't mean most are bad. But, it's just like poison. A little small cup of poison in a cup of coffee, the whole cup is poison. And when you are a police officer and you have the authority to kill if you have feared for your life, which is very subjective, by the way, you have to make sure as much as reasonably possible that all those officers are worth the trust that we have in officers to uphold what is right. So I believe in community directed policing, where the police partner with the local communities. Yes, you're going to have the officers working the beat who will be there as a deterrent, but put them in the most troubled areas where sometimes just their presence alone will lead to a deterrence of crime. Let them have a presence in those areas. But in other areas, the police officers will partner, and the troubled areas too, with the community there to see what resources they have and to help provide those resources. Because often what causes crime is not color. What causes crime is not creed. What causes crime has often been shown in many studies to correlate with generationally entrenched poverty. What causes crime has been shown to be a lack of access to healthcare, not just physical healthcare, but mental healthcare, something we are drastically lacking in this country. What causes crime is a lot of economic insecurity that leads to people having higher stress levels. It leads to people being away from their home much more often, and leads to a lot of unsupervised children that sometimes get into things in which they otherwise would not. So my plan calls for healthcare, okay, that we provided for the government. Some people say, oh, Marcel, you are a fiscal liberal. If you look at my platform, which we haven't talked about some of these things, I will definitely not be considered a liberal. But I believe that we spend a lot of money, supposedly, on these foreign nations underneath the guise that we're trying to keep ourselves safe here. A lot of nations like America don't fall because of external attacks. We fall because of internal conflict. So if we want to say that we want to keep the USA safe, the best way to keep the USA safe is by investing in our citizens here and having, as much as we possibly can, a stable, happy populace.
Interesting. I'm not big on cops, Marcel. I'm not big on the police, on the popo, but I hear what you're saying.
Now I say something, Sabrina, on that.
Go ahead.
I believe, this is kind of controversial. I believe we, as Black Americans, need to have our own police unit. And my plan calls for that under my Better Deal for Black America. I believe more of us need to join the police force now. Sometimes we have to, I hate to say it, infiltrate the enemy ranks to sometimes change within the enemy ranks. That's why I'm running for office. I was not big on the government, feeling like they never done anything for us. That's what a lot of my people believe. I told the Black Americans, they ain't never going to do reparations. I believe the way to change a system is by taking over the system, even and that's institutionally speaking.
That's interesting. So I guess one of the big questions I have is, why run through the Democratic Party? And I ask this question just because we've seen what has happened to so-called progressive members that did actually get into Congress as Democrats, and we've seen them basically, in some circumstances, they've had their hands tied, or Democrat Party leadership has basically told them no in areas where, as someone who was a Justice Democrat, they should have pushed back against Democrat leadership. Why run as a Democrat going into that same strife that the progressive Democrats or like members of the squad have had to deal with? And why not run as an independent?
I'm not sure if the squad is really quote unquote progressive. And here's the things, Sabrina, you probably looked at my platform. There are several things on my platform which I get asked by these Democratic shills, these Democratic loyalists all the time. Well, why are you running as a Democrat? Then you obviously don't like us, or you just a Republican and blackface. I've literally had that said. One of the reasons I'm running, Sabrina, is there's something missing in our society, and especially among the people who are elected officials. I'm referring to them. Accountability and responsibility. When we, as Black Americans, especially the freedmen, I'm not referring to those who are immigrants or immigrant descendant. When we vote for a party, that party has the responsibility to provide for us. We have the responsibility to hold them accountable. We have both failed. They have failed to provide for us. And when they fail to provide for us, they say, well, the Republicans are stopping everything. So if you are saying to me that every single time you are in office, the Republicans are stopping you from doing what you can do for us, then you're saying to me that you have no power, you don't deserve my vote, and maybe I need to go to the Republicans who actually can get things done. That's what you're saying. So the Democrats have the responsibility to provide for us, but they're never held accountable. Me running as a Democrat is to hold them accountable. They will love it if I ran as a Republican, if I ran as an independent, because that way when they have their little meetings, which only Democratic candidates are invited, they won't have to worry about me there making them uncomfortable. You see, they don't want to be uncomfortable for an hour or two during these meetings, yet my people's lives are uncomfortable from day to night and has been for centuries and for decades since voting for them. I'm running as a Democrat to hold them accountable from the inside. One time I went outside, my mother wanted us to clean up. My mother was like, hey, I said get in the house to clean up. And she said something to me when I was a kid. She's like, you can't clean up the inside from the outside. That resonated with me. You cannot clean up the inside from the outside. But I'm not just looking to clean up the inside. I'm looking to take over the inside. I'm a fan of people running for office under any party banner because my attitude is the policy matters, not the party. And if enough people run on good policy underneath any party, that right there changes the party, because the party is just a way to keep us divided and really just a fundraising mechanism that they use to keep their pockets nice and fat.
Interesting. So I have this question about what happened at AME Church in Charleston recently. Joe Biden was there. Jim Clyburn was sitting right next to him. And there were protesters that actually disrupted that. A lot of people may not realize this because those protesters were ushered out. Obviously, they were calling for a ceasefire. They were making demands towards Joe Biden. They actually did have a comprehensive list of demands. And I don't think everyone has seen this. It says the organizers that disrupted Biden's speech at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston to demand a ceasefire have released a statement with demands. And I just want to show some of those demands here, which is an end to the deadly exchange, the transfer and manufacturing of weapons among the Israeli government, the United States government, and oppressive government regimes throughout the world. 2, an end to the normalization of Zionism and violence against Palestinians in every aspect of our lives, including but not limited to media narratives, institutional support, and government backing. And 3, accountability for elected officials who actively support and even praise Israel's war crimes. And there's another part I want to go to in just a second. But first, I want to hear from you, Marcel, in reference to this war with Israel and Gaza. Where do you stand on this particular issue? And what do you think about the event that took place at AME in Charleston, South Carolina?
Well, I do believe it's a genocide. First of all, I think all these wars are pointless. That's what I want to say. And second of all, when you kill anyone who is not a combatant, and you are doing it on the level, any level, but especially where I heard like 20,000 people have been killed, that's disgusting. And the fact that we're funding it, it's disgusting, but not surprising. And here's what I've been saying to people. I don't understand I get why we're disgusted. I don't understand why we are surprised. America and many millions of Americans stand back and watch this nation commit a genocide against Black Americans. They're not dropping bombs at us anymore. They've been doing it. They did it last time in the 1980s, but they're not dropping bombs on us any longer. But it's still a genocide being committed against Black Americans, economically speaking, politically speaking, and physically speaking. And a lot of Americans are content just to sit back and let that happen. They might go out in the street and protest with a poster, and that'll be about the end of it. But nothing legislative ever gets done to specifically protect us. You are specifically protesting on behalf of the Palestinians. You want action to be taken on their behalf. No action is taken on our behalf to help us. So I do think it's disgusting, but I always say to white conservatives who are now complaining that the government is terrorizing them and tyrannical, the police brutality and votes don't matter. I said, where have you heard that before, I wonder? I said, what you allowed them to do to us, they will eventually do to you. And that's pretty much what's happening in Palestine. The protests, here's 2 things I want to say. 1, I was bothered by the protest for one reason, because in Mother Emanuel, I feel that the issues that are particularly pertaining to the Black American community should have been brought up, and Joe Biden should have been made and called to task. They were not going to let me in that church. Several people I know who are not as controversial, I will say, I don't think I'm controversial at all, but who are not as controversial as me were turned around. And these are some of the most peaceful, diplomatic people you can imagine. And they turned them around. They would have definitely turned me around. I didn't get an invite anyway. I'm not sure if y'all know how this works, but the Democratic Party or the Republican Party too, when they get events like this, they will send specific members who are registered with their party an opportunity to register for the event. I never got it, and I knew I wasn't. I will say, however, people like to criticize the way people protest, but they have very little criticism for the thing and people against whom they are protesting. So Joe Biden should never have been allowed in Mother Emanuel with his deep, disgusting history of anti-Black American racism. Okay, I'm criticized all the time for the way I call the Democratic Party to task. The Republicans too, but mainly the Democrats. And my thing is criticize. Where's your criticism for the issues against which I am protesting? That's where those criticisms should be.
Right. I know some people, like myself, I was like, why is he allowed to speak there in the first place? And then the people who stood up and said 4 more years, I'm now being told that those people, I guess, were paid operatives or whatever, that those were not
paid, but they were definitely picked. They were definitely picked. They vet you. They definitely vet you. I've tried. Kamala Harris came here before one time, and I tried to go to the event, and it was like, oh, you're not on the list. I said, I never got an email to register. I thought it was just, open access. They was like, no, you got to leave. Bye. So the people who they pick are the people they know are going to be the most loyal. How those people who protested got in, they must have been keeping a low profile and probably have previously been Democratic loyalists. Or I felt that was staged. I really do feel it was staged. The young Black lady that stood up and protested with them had a smile on her face the whole time. Like, girl, I'm about to get paid. So I don't know. The whole thing kind of seemed a little weird to me because the guy that I know who was turned around, he's very fiercely calling for a ceasefire, and he was turned around. And he's not a disruptor, not in the sense that those people would or anything like that. He got turned around.
So this part here is really interesting when people tell me that they shouldn't be concerned about this. This has nothing to do with Americans, or people have told me, they said Black people shouldn't concern themselves with what's happening in Gaza because it's not our issue. I want to point something out when we talk about where funds are going. So Carolyn Hines she took a snapshot of this from those listed demands. This part is very interesting as they are showing a direct connection between a company located in Ladston, South Carolina, and Israel, and how its financial investment in Israel's oppression of Palestinians is tied to the removal of financial resources for a South Carolina school. And it says here, number 4, and into Elbit Systems, a facility manufacturing weapons the IOF currently uses to commit its crimes against humanity, operating in Ladston, South Carolina. Elbit Systems invested $35 million in the relocation and recently opened its 135,000 square foot plant in Ladston. It received tax cuts for its investment. A 2019 fiscal year report disclosed that company's extra revenue diverted $423 million from public schools across the state, disproportionately low-income schools with mostly Black and brown students. Want to get your take on that, Marcel?
That just goes to what I've been saying this entire interview. This country is readily willing to invest in warfare with other countries, foreign aid for other countries, people in the country illegally, and large corporations. They're least willing to invest in quality education, healthcare, reparations for the people that this government owes. Okay, that's not a handout. That's not you're doing me a favor. That's what you owe. And I'm not surprised to hear that. There is one thing, there's criticism I would give to these protests, however. Were you concerned about Black Americans living in areas that are resource deprived before this Palestinian-Israeli conflict? I really do take offense when people use our Black American issues to kind of, give more support, to give more validity to whatever issue they're protesting. They use us as they use our struggle as talking points. Well, this government has a history of supporting genocide. Look how they treated Black Americans for centuries. Okay, if they've treated Black Americans in a very, very genocidal way for centuries, are you calling for the repair of that violence for centuries? I'm not saying other atrocities should happen and we should not be concerned about other atrocities. What I am saying is don't use the Black American pain to just try to give more validity to another protest where otherwise you don't care what happens with Black Americans. You just want to see like you're on the right side of history for this issue. But the real fight, because this country has a unique special hate against Black Americans, freedmen, you say nothing about. So what they're saying, I'm sure it's true. You see how much money this nation is willing to spend on things that are not truly going to help the general populace, but they won't spend it on helping actual Americans. That's true. But don't use the Black American story and experience when you say nothing about what we're owed as a result of that experience in that story.
That's a good point, Marcel. How do you feel about this recent, or I guess it's not so much recent anymore, the situation happening in cities like Chicago, New York City, parts of Boston as well, where the mayors, which these cities are Democrat-run cities, the mayors and the state government has decided to give benefits to migrants. And for me, the way I've explained this to my audience multiple times is that my criticism is not with the migrants. My criticism is obviously the foreign policy decisions that our government has made in those countries that is causing people to come here the way that they're coming in the first place. But my thing is, if you are going to give $9,000 to migrants in Chicago so that they can have housing, why aren't you giving that to all the other people in Chicago that did come here legally or were born in this country? Why aren't you giving that to them? And some people feel as though it is because they're trying to actually give these benefits to the migrant population because they're trying to replace the workforce in the United States. I want to get your take on that.
Absolutely. There was a survey done showing that the number of Americans who see immigration, whether even legal or illegal, as a negative has reached historic highs. Now, Black Americans have historically been the most welcoming people, and to some extent that's admirable, and to some extent that's been our problem on the other hand as well. That's a whole other conversation. But even Black Americans are now viewing immigration as a negative because we are usually the first impacted. We usually have to compete for the same jobs, but it's not necessarily about jobs. What it is about is we see ourselves, who this nation owes, who this nation has viciously, and vicious is an understatement, deprived of resources, has prevented from getting resources, and has stolen the little bit of resources that we have to work in spite of this government to receive. When they see people, when we see our loved ones, when we see our loved ones struggling, we see people who look like us, who are of our lineage, freedmen, the descendants of the enslaved, emancipated by America, sleeping on cold streets. And yet, an illegal immigrant who just arrived, I guess, yesterday, getting an apartment, in the case of what's happening in Maine, $9,000, and we have received nothing. And we express our rightful outrage. And people want to tell us, they want to do what they did with those ceasefire protesters in the church. They want to criticize the way we express our discontent instead of criticizing the wrong that is being done. It is not changing our minds any. It's actually doing what you're seeing happening, where you have people in Chicago and in New York City, and it's happening in the South too. I can tell you, South Carolina and Georgia's right there. People are starting to turn towards Trump, and including me, to be very honest with you, because we feel like this is unfair. This nation is spending trillions, if you add up a cumulative amount, on people who are not here illegally, but Black Americans are getting nothing. And it becomes about, if we don't have it, and you say you can't do it for us, how can you do it for others? Now, I will say what you just said. I am not so angry with the people here illegally. That should be stopped. That should be stopped, absolutely. I'm more angry with the corporations and with the politicians, because what you have to look at is what's called the pull factors. What's bringing them here? You have corporations who do not want to pay a living wage, and living wage is a low ball. Let's be honest. A living wage is a very low ball, but they don't even want to do that. So the moment Americans who deserve better and have earned better say, hey, you want to give us better? They say, I got an answer. Let me import a cheap labor force. It's the same thing the Democratic Party is doing. And the Republicans too. Both parties love this, by the way. The Republicans get on camera and say, I'm going to close the border down. Yet they don't go after the corporations who are bringing them here. So they're not really for it. But what I am saying, the Democrats are seeing that Black Americans are finally waking up again. and we're becoming more demanding as a people. So now, just like the corporations, they don't want to meet our needs that we deserve to have met. So they're saying, oh, you're complaining? Let me import some new voters over here. And they're giving people who are here illegally the right to vote. And then, of course, if they have children, their children have the right to vote. You should not be allowed to replace the labor force because you don't want to meet the needs of the American labor force. You should not be allowed to replace your constituency simply because you don't want to do your job as an elected official and meet the needs of your constituents.
Marcel Dixon, very well said. Marcel, where can people find you on social media?
I am Marcel, digit number 4, Congress on Twitter. That's my most active social media account.
Awesome. Marcel, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. You take care.
All right.